Moggcast, a fortnightly conversation with Jacob Rees Mogg about the topics of the day.
Welcome to another edition of the Moggcast. This is Paul Goodman, editor of Conservative Home, with Jacob Rees Mogg. Today, Jacob, I thought we'd take a break from Brexit and discuss late Victorian church architecture.
You probably know a good deal more about it than I do, so that might not get us very far. It'd be a brief conversation.
I only said that, of course, just to spook the readers, so we can get back to Brexit, however brief the conversation might or might not have been. Again, we're recording this on a Monday. The listeners will hear it tomorrow morning, Tuesday. Do you believe by then that the 48 letters will have been received?
I don't know. I think that there are many people who lack confidence in the Prime Minister's leadership and who have come to the conclusion that the deal is, or the proposal is, very bad, really much worse than could have been expected, and that as it's been looked at carefully, it's turned out to be worse than the initial leaks rather than better. But some people don't want a leadership vote now. They would like it when the meaningful vote comes up and think that is the time to put in letters. And people make their judgment on that. So I wouldn't like to make a solid forecast.
Don't you think that great expectations may have been raised that are impossible to fulfil, and that therefore, arguably, you and Steve Baker made a tactical mistake by going for this now? And also in particular, I'm not sure that you've done it, by suggesting that the 48 letters were on the verge of being reached when they haven't been.
This isn't about tactical mistakes, it's about the future of the country. And are we signing up to a deal that leaves us as a rule taker from the European Union for the rest of our lifetimes? And all of my tactics may be right, they may be wrong, but that is the flotsam and jetsam of political life. What really matters is this dreadful deal that is the vassal state. I mean, it is really quite extraordinary that the Prime Minister could sign up to this and could have said so many things contrary to what is in the document. That is the most frustrating thing, is that what the document has within it is not what the Prime Minister said. So tactics are one thing, but the fundamental policy is the key.
Don't the tactics matter, and aren't they related to the policy in this sense? And again, I apologise to listeners, because by the time they're hearing all this, you may have reached the 48 letter threshold after all. But if you haven't, it's a blow to the reputation of the ERG's capacity to manage things. That puts the wind in the Prime Minister's sails, and it makes it more likely she'll prosper when it comes to the meaningful vote.
Time will tell. I think that's unlikely. I think that the strength of feeling against the meaningful vote is much stronger than the number of letters that has gone in. So people like Dominic Raab have said they will vote against the deal, and Dominic's made it clear that he is supporting Theresa May. So it's not as simple as that. And if there are letters in, very few of those letters will be withdrawn. So the hurdle is much lower for when the meaningful vote comes. So I don't know whether we will get the 48 letters this week or next week. I wouldn't want to be held to a forecast on that. But I think that it will come before the meaningful vote at the latest, because there is so much discontent with the policy, and that in a way it is better that there has been this delay, though I can't pretend this was some cunning plan, because we have allowed time for people to see the failures of the policy. That your article on Monday morning was crucially important in dissecting the policy. Lee Rotherham's piece, brilliant piece by Quentin Letts, who is almost the conscience of the Conservative Party, that he has a huge following amongst Conservative members. And he wrote a really remarkable piece in the Sunday Telegraph about the failures of the deal and the lack of backbone in it. It was a very powerful piece, And that's helping people to see the failures in Technicolor, whereas perhaps when I first opposed it, we were seeing the problems in black and white.
How many Conservative MPs do you think will vote against the deal when the meaningful vote comes?
You keep on asking me for numbers, and numbers are very difficult to predict because people will decide when the time comes what they're going to do. I think the question really is going to be for the government of how many Labour members can they get to support it. And one of the reasons I would prefer to have the confidence vote sooner rather than later is that I think a 1971 style vote with a large number of Labour rebels with a Roy Jenkins type leader could help the government get this very bad deal through.
What the Labour rebels do, if there are many, in terms of the numbers, does of course take us back to the Tory numbers, and I'm not so shy as not to offer one. I've had a preliminary look, and I think that at least 29, it's got a modest total of Conservative MPs, will not support it. Do you think that's on the low side?
I think it would be very peculiar to back the deal if you've written a letter questioning the Prime Minister's leadership. But none of us know the numbers who have written letters, so there are some people who've said so publicly. There's also the question of the DUP, and I have a legal opinion which follows on from the piece you had over the weekend, but I've had the legal opinion checked by somebody who is particularly expert in this field, who confirms that it creates a separate customs union for Northern Ireland. Now, I think that makes the DUP's position extraordinarily difficult.
It was said over the weekend that there's widespread new, growing popularity for the Prime Minister as a dogged, determined woman doing her duty over here, and over there is this band of disorganised and quarrelsome men, some of whom won't declare that they've sent in letters and won't declare their hostility, and that there's growing support for her position in the voluntary party. What do you think about that?
I think all of us have an admiration for Theresa May's determination, and I don't think anybody wanted to write a letter of no confidence that the Prime Minister has great qualities, and I've discussed with you before the one that I think is the highest quality. I think she does what she perceives to be her duty. And for a long time I wished to differentiate between the policy and the person until that became impossible. I think it's eccentric to say it's a group of men when one of the people who resigned from the cabinet was Esther McVeigh, and another ministerial resignation was Suella Braverman. So gender classifications that you're giving are not entirely accurate. But what do the people think in the associations? Well, I addressed two associations on Thursday night and on Friday night. Admittedly, associations have a strong leave.
Where was that?
Actually for Suella and then for Julia Lopez in Upminster. I did not find that there was support for the Prime Minister's policy, nor did I find people coming up to me saying, how could you do this? That I found that there was a feeling that we were being let down on Brexit, we weren't getting Brexit, and that therefore the conclusion I come to may not be the one all of them had come to. It would be overstating it to say they all had, but one that many had also come to.
Do you think this group of 5 cabinet ministers who are asking the Prime Minister to go back and renegotiate bits of the withdrawal agreement are barking up a hopeless tree?
Well, they're a group of very intelligent, capable people. They have a strategy, and they've had a consistent strategy, which is to change the policy. And I have come to the conclusion that you cannot change the policy without changing the person. I'm not infallible, I may be wrong, and it may be that you can change the policy even at this late stage. And there's certainly an argument for saying that it's worth trying. I would be surprised if it was successful. If you look at the interview the Prime Minister did with Sophie Ridge on Sky News on Sunday morning, that gave the impression that there was no possibility of changing the withdrawal agreement. And so it seems unlikely, but it's not improper to try. It's not lack of sincerity or anything of that kind.
But is it a mistaken judgment? Shouldn't they have resigned last week along with Dominic Raab and Esther McVeigh?
I think one has to be very careful about calling upon Secretaries of State to resign. It's a big decision to make, and it's very easy for backbenchers to say, you should resign, you should go, you should do this and the next thing. When you're a backbencher, you're in a different position, and people have to decide, looking in the round at their careers and in the influence that they have whilst remaining within government, whether on balance they think staying in will lead to more good than harm, and that's a judgment for them to make. And it's easy at a time like this to expect people to make the hard-nosed, resign judgment, but most resignations lead to absolutely nothing changing at all. So Robin Cook resigned and absolutely nothing happened. The waters close over and business goes on as usual. And so resignations need to be carefully calibrated. They need to be at a point at which they change things, or they allow other people to point in the direction of change. So the resignations over Chequers were crucial because they allowed other people to make the case for why Chequers didn't work, whereas if Boris Johnson and David Davis had gone along with it, anyone opposing it would have looked eccentric. The Dominic and Esther's resignations were very important last week because, once again, they showed that the agreement was unsatisfactory from the point of view of people at the highest level, and indeed had been put together without keeping the relevant Secretary of State properly informed, which is a constitutional anomaly. And so their resignations were important. The question the five had to ask themselves is, by resigning, can they stop this policy altogether? And if they can, then that may be the conclusion they come to. On the other hand, they may think they can't, and that therefore they should do their best to ameliorate it by remaining in.
Presumably they shouldn't actually vote for the proposal and should resign rather than so do.
Well, I think one or two of them have indicated that they will find it very difficult to vote for the proposal. And for one or two of them it doesn't align with things that they have said very firmly that they would not support. But they'll make that judgment at the time.
We've been conducting these modcasts for some time, and you've always been very cautious about the way ahead, and you've always been, I mean, up until last week, so I'm thinking back to the time we did the last modcast, supportive of the Prime Minister. I want to go back to last week. You went through a process of first asking in Prime Minister's questions, why shouldn't I put in a letter? And then actually announcing that you would put in a letter. Did you know, when you asked that question, you were going to put a letter in?
I thought it was highly likely, otherwise I wouldn't have asked the question. But I could have had such a strong answer that I would have been deterred from doing so. So there was a small chance that I wouldn't, but I hadn't written a letter at that point.
So it all rested on the answer?
And on the statement and on the other answers. Her answer to Nigel Dodds was very important. That, you see, this issue is not just about what the Conservatives think. It's, is there a government? If Theresa May has so alienated the DUP that they are not going to abide by the confidence and supply agreement, or are going to pick and mix, then the position of the government is extraordinarily shaky. So what Tory MPs have to think for themselves is, do they want effectively Theresa May leading us into the next general election, which could be rather sooner than people want, because the deal puts a border in the Irish Sea, which is, as Arlene Foster said, a blood-red line for the DUP.
Did you come out of PMQs determined to write that letter? Was that the moment that decided you one way or the other?
I knew that's what I was going to do, yes. And after
she gave the answer.
After she gave the answer and some more answers, which were very much of the same tone, I came to the conclusion that I would write a letter. I do not believe that Theresa May can lead the Conservative Party successfully into the next general election. And I think this deal is damaging for the country and ruinous for the Conservative Party.
Is there anything good at all about this deal?
There are bits of the agreement that you might want to have in other circumstances, but that's not enough. It's not a cure its egg question. It's what is this fundamentally doing? What does it do to the position of the United Kingdom? How does it bind us in? What pressure does the backstop put on the future negotiations? Because we're basically agreeing in this that Northern Ireland will have all the same regulations under the single market for goods as the EU as a whole has. And therefore that means probably the whole of the UK has to do so, because otherwise we'd have to have a border in the Irish Sea. So provisions are made for a border in the Irish Sea. And that's a really unsatisfactory situation to be in. But also the document itself says that in the backstop, all our tariffs will be set by the European Union without us having any say over them. We will not be able to reduce them. Specifically, it says we won't be able to reduce them. And the treaty says that the treaty will itself be superior law, like the European Communities Act, so Parliament won't be able to routinely override it. This is quite extraordinary, both constitutionally and in its daily effect.
What's your message to Conservative colleagues if, as we broadcast tomorrow morning, the 48-letter limit has been reached?
Well, if it has been reached and people are coming to a vote, I think the key is, do you want Theresa May leading you into the next general election? Why do I say that when there could be a vote within a year? Well, we've seen it's harder to get 48 letters than people thought. It's not just something that happens, and if we get a year from now and this vote doesn't go through, who's going to be putting in the 48 letters then? So there's that high hurdle. The Prime Minister has shown one of her great qualities is that she is determined, she carries on. So the idea that she will say, oh, well, actually, I'm going to go on such and such a date, I think is a remote possibility. And if she is there in a year's time, she will be the leader into the next general election. And I think that is a question that will cause many Conservative MPs to ponder whether they really have confidence in her.
Has she behaved honourably? For example, she made it very clear, I remember this from a video, quite an effective one, from Downing Street pushing the Chequers plan. It's very clear in that video that the position then was against even a regulatory border in the Irish Sea, but there's one in this agreement.
And a customs one, it is separate customs area.
Certainly a regulatory one.
I've got a legal opinion saying that it is a separate customs area and potentially breaches the Customs Act.
My point is, she said there wouldn't even be a regulatory one, and there will certainly be a regulatory one.
Yes, I accept your point. I don't want to throw mud at the Prime Minister personally. I think she is a very remarkable and capable person. I think she is very diligent. She's worked very hard at this. I don't dispute any of that. I just think the answer she's come up with is wrong, and I don't think it matches her previous promises. Disraeli's criticism of Peel, in the end, was it didn't matter whether he was right or wrong, but he was not the person who should have done it because he had promised people otherwise. And I think this is a really important point. I think the politicians ought to stick to what they have said without getting a new mandate from the electorate or handing over to somebody else who believes in the new policy that they have shifted towards. I don't think politicians can just come up with a completely new policy, completely different from all their promises, and plough on regardless. I don't think it's dishonest to change your mind. I think it's perfectly legitimate. But I think if you've got yourself elected on one set of promises to implement a completely different one, leaves you in a difficult and awkward position.
And what's the problem for you at the heart of this proposal?
Well, we're not leaving the European Union. Indeed, we are half in, half out, and take a very large number of our rules from the EU, and their ability to do trade negotiations. We'll pay a large amount of money, £39 billion, for nothing very much. We'll be subject to the European Court of Justice. and will have divided Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK, so Northern Ireland will be more dependent on Dublin for its rule-making than on London.
Just finally, if you were the EU, looking at it from the EU side, do you think there'd be anything to bother you about this agreement?
I think if I were the EU, I'd be rubbing my hands with glee. They've got everything that they wanted. They've got the complete capitulation of a nation-state to the power of Brussels.
Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Moggcast, a fortnightly conversation with Jacob Rees Mogg about the topics of the day.